Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Blindseyepodcast, the podcast discussing everything you did and didn't want to know about being blind. I am your host Connor, and today I thought we would talk about buses and taxis. Now, I've already kind of done a little bit on taxis. There isn't really as much to cover, and I don't really use much of buses, but it is a transport option. So I thought I would explore some of the things that need to be considered when you have low vision or no vision, and I guess some of the pros and cons of using different kinds of transport over others. Usual boring disclaimer, just my thoughts and opinions, not the same as every other person who's blind or low vision. Okay, so if I'm using the bus and I wanted to be a bus wanker, in the words of the in-betweeners, there's a few things to consider. So, firstly, there's knowing which bus you're looking for, because unlike trains or taxis, you don't have, an audible option. If you're on a train platform, a announcement will say what train is about to come in on what platform. So you have a certain idea, whereas with bus stops, it's a bit of a mixed bag. So if it's a suburban bus stop, then you have a fairly good idea that whatever buses that are coming along are the ones that you want, and there's not that many to choose from. So that's not really an issue. But if you're at a bus interchange, then you might have, 6 or 7 buses there at once, and lots of noise going on, especially near me. It's right next to the train station, so there's lots of noise. I can't quite tell when buses are idling or whether they are pulling out, things like that. So it can be very hard to know. And, like one bus might decide that he's going to pull up exactly in the same place in the rank. And the next time he comes in at the end of his loop, he might pull in 20 meters down the way. And I could be standing up at the other end and not knowing that someone's there. And that has happened to me a few times where I've been waiting for a bus and, I guess because they aren't as an exact timetable as trains and things like that, that either I thought the bus had already gone and so I sat down, or was waiting and the bus was there all along, but it was a few meters further away, 10, 20 meters away, and I couldn't see it, and they didn't necessarily know it was me who wanted to get on that bus. So they just went. So for all those kinds of reasons, that's why I find buses kind of problematic, firstly. The second reason is that, at least in my area, you have kind of different kinds of buses. So there are more modern ones that, have the whole hydraulic lift up and down. They have wide enough entranceways for wheelchairs and things like that. And they're quite accessible. They're quite modern. They have plenty of buzzers, and there's no steps or anything, that it'll lower itself up and down to the level of the footpath. Now, those buses are great for everybody, not just somebody maybe with a disability or anything like that. They're just really easy. They're built in mind for the best possible outcomes. But then sometimes you come across buses that might be in service longer, where there's 2 or 3 funky steps to get up, and it's narrow and all these kinds of things. So it can be hard to sort of know what you're getting on and how you're going to do it independently, and where you should find the seat and what kind of seats you might find, because there's all these differences and you can't necessarily tell with any amount of assuredness that you know how to sort the problem out. And, you always do sort the problem out, but these kind of little things, you just have to think about. Particularly with the layout, one of the issues I have is that, we have the opal passes, so, you tap on and you tap off. But on different buses or different models of bus, they are in different areas. So, they're usually as you're coming in and out of the bus stairway or entranceway. But with some of the older buses, they're at different levels. So I don't even know where the things are in order to tap them because, and there might be 10 people behind me trying to get on the bus. And here I am trying to flail around um, to tap on and off. So, all those little things add up and you're kind of like, oh my God, I'm in everybody's way and all this kind of stuff, but there's no uniformity there. So it's very hard to know. And, I might only be missing it by 6 inches, but that 6 inches difference between one model of a bus and another is enough, I guess, to hold the situation up. And it's not the biggest thing in the world, but it's just all these little things that kind of make the experience more or less smooth or nerve wracking or whatever. So another interesting thing that you have to get used to is knowing where you are along the route. So we all know it's not like a car where you just drive from point A to point B. The bus program has been designed in a way to try and maximize how many streets it will be on, so it'll be as accessible for the most amount of people. So when it's going from my house to the station or vice versa, then I might have a situation where it's going on all these streets that I never go on when I'm in a car with anybody else. And you're turning left and right, and you're stopping and all this stuff. And it's very easy when you can't see to kind of get turned around. So what I do is I open up my GPS on my phone. So I have a few different apps for GPS or maps or something like that. And that will tell me what street I'm on or what address I'm closest to. And it'll give me a vague idea of where I am. So for the most part now, I've kind of learned, okay, this should be left up here. And if we go left, then I know I'm on the right track. And then I'll say, okay, I think then the next stop should be right if we're in the right area. And then we turn right. And so that kind of gives me my assurance that I'm aware of where we are along the way, because it's not like trains where they stop at every stop that they tell you they're going to stop at. Buses will stop at the stops that somebody actually wants. Otherwise, they will just keep going. So it's one of those things where if you don't know where you are, you might find that you didn't press the button in time or didn't alert the driver and they've already gone past. And that might be the difference between you getting dropped off at one of the next stops, which might be a space that you don't really know how to get yourself home from. And then you're in more trouble. The interesting thing actually with the GPS is that sometimes, depending on what's going on, your GPS accuracy might be worse or less. So I've been on buses where it was telling me that I was on the street parallel to where I actually was. And in some cases, I was right on the right bus, but the GPS confused me, or vice versa, where the bus was wrong and the GPS was right, and I got confused in the other way. So that's always not a guarantee either. I mean, nowadays GPS is fairly good, but depending on what's going on and the coverage you have and stuff, it can be out by 100, 200 foot, which could easily be, a parallel main road. Now, the last two things on buses, I guess, would be the two big ones, I guess, for the reasons why I don't really use them or don't really use them anymore or haven't really taken to them. So the first is that I actually was very close to being hit by a bus. So I was at the train station, I was crossing over to the interchange, and as I said a few minutes ago, there was quite a few buses idling, and they have like those massively loud diesel engines. And in situations like that, I try to just stand still and wait for things to quieten down. But you don't always have that luxury, because sometimes things just won't quieten down and you kind of just have to take your chance. And so in those situations, I started crossing the road or over the entrance of the interchange towards my bus bay. And I always make sure in those situations when things are a little bit unclear and I can't really hear that well, to walk as slowly as I can. So it gives people as much time as possible to see me. And anyway, so I was walking across the way, and these people just started calling out, and I didn't know what they were saying, and I kind of heard this engine that was a little bit closer to me all of a sudden, and I put my hand out, and my hand was touching the side of the bus as it was going past. And yes, it wasn't going at any kind of speed, but I was, my hand was there, and the bus was sliding underneath my hand on its way past, and it turns out those people had been yelling to the driver not to go because they could see me coming. And it actually turned out to be my bus. It turned out to be the bus that I was trying to get on to go home. So that kind of freaked me out, as you can imagine, because there's just so much more, at least in my view, there's so much more human error possible than on a train line. A train can go east or west. It can't go wherever else it wants to go. It goes at a specific time. It has a stop in a specific place. It has stops it will always stop at no matter what. All these kinds of things, where the bus is a little bit more flexible in that way. And yeah, I just find that it's not a reliable enough thing that gives me any kind of confidence in myself or my safety, and also just in terms of like where I want to get to. I mean, the other big part of this is that, at least in my area, probably 6 or 7 years ago, once the government changed hands in the state, the buses went from coming every half an hour to every hour. And I only live 6 kilometers away from the bus station, from the train station. So I can get a taxi, which, yes, costs more money, and get home sooner than I can getting a bus, which costs less money. But, at the end of the day, you're at the station and you go, okay, well, it's 5 o'clock. I could be home in 20 minutes or less if I get a taxi. Or I could be home at 6 o'clock paying, a pittance or nothing. And that all depends on whether I'm actually able to get the right bus and he doesn't go past me and I'm waiting for an hour again. So in my mind, then that just becomes an easy option. And that's why so many people who are blind or low vision just use trains and taxis, because buses are much more sporadic and much more hard to pin down in terms of what kind of experience you're going to have. So speaking of taxis, because this is the other side of this episode, you have a very important resource there if you have a vision issue. So, there's lots of times where you want to go somewhere and, you don't have time to learn how to get there. Your friends might say, hey, we're going to this restaurant, and you might have never heard of that restaurant before, and you might want to get there yourself. You might not want to ask anybody else if they could give you a lift. And so in that situation, there's getting a bus which may drop you off within a couple of 100 meters of the area, assuming everything goes well. But still, you need to know how to get from that stop to a place you've never been to before. Or you can get a taxi, which has a much higher likelihood of being able to just drop you exactly where you need to be. And it just takes a lot of the extra stress and complications out of the journey. And that's why trains and taxis are so important, because I guess the train is great for like the big journeys, but for those specific areas out in the suburbs that aren't necessarily blessed with public transport options, then the taxis are kind of like your bread and butter, because you're able to get pulled up exactly where you need to be, and it's much easier to work those problems out than when there's only 10 or 15 meters between you and your destination than hundreds of meters and main roads and lots of people. So that's why taxis are such a big deal for somebody like myself. In saying that, though, I get kind of the same thing with the buses. So if I am at the bus stop and I've missed one or whatever, then I'll walk over to the taxi rank. And I've had plenty of times where I was just standing there and couldn't hear anything. And then, 20 minutes later, somebody says, oh, mate, do you need a taxi? And you say, yeah. And you would have found out there was 3 or 4 of them in there the whole time. But, they just thought, well, you didn't jump in. So, so you mustn't have wanted one. And then a few times, they say, oh, we thought you were waiting for somebody. And I'm like, yeah, I was waiting for a taxi rank. Like, I'm waiting for a taxi. That's why I'm in a taxi rank. Like, who else would I be waiting for? But, I guess some people will kind of say, well, oh, well, you didn't get in. And it's like, well, the car's not on. I can't hear anything. I can't see anything. So, of course I wasn't going to get in. So that has happened, yeah, far too many times, unfortunately. And that's kind of the other thing as well, especially nowadays with hybrid cars and electric cars. Those cars don't have engine noises. So sometimes there could be a taxi in front of you and it's actually turned on, but you can't hear anything because there's no sound of a motor. And I've had that with, maybe I've called one and they pulled up at the end of my driveway. And then I get a call a few minutes later of somebody saying, hey, are you getting a taxi? Like, it's waiting for you. But they didn't beep the horn and I couldn't hear the engine because it's a hybrid. So I didn't even know that they were there. And it's kind of becoming a bit of a safety issue. Like, I know some people who have been collected by not just taxis, but hybrid vehicles or electric vehicles because they don't have the sound. If a car is coming, you can hear the engine. Even though, yeah, they're pretty quiet nowadays, but you can still hear it. So with taxis and hybrid cars, you can't hear it. So you could cross a road thinking, yeah, I'm sweet, nothing's coming, and something actually is coming, but it's just that quiet that you can't really do anything about it. And you can't really not cross the road because a car you can't hear might be coming, because that's just not really practical. I do know, however, on that apparently Jaguar have developed some new patented technology where they've kind of built in some kind of sounds into their new electric or hybrid engines that mimics the sound in some way of a traditional motor car. So when the speed picks up, this sound will pick up in velocity, and likewise when it's coming down. So it'll mimic, without being the same sound as a normal traditional car, it will mimic the sounds so that people can hear that something is coming. And I mean, it's not just an issue for somebody who can't see or somebody who might be deaf. I mean, how many people walk around, just glued to their phones or with, AirPods in or something like that. So it's a bit of a silent killer no matter what. You don't have to just be disabled. So that'd be really interesting to see when that comes out. And I think they're the first to do that. And so I think now that they've kind of bitten the bullet, a lot of other manufacturers have kind of gotten on board because nobody wants to be the first to move because they don't want to have to put in the expense. But hopefully something good will come from that. And the last thing about taxis, I just wanted to say, is the kind of a big one. A lot of people say, oh, how do you know they're not ripping you off? And that is always a concern. And I will kind of caveat this by saying that I've met lots of really awesome taxi drivers over the years. There was one guy in particular that I had his number for 9 years. And so I would call him for absolutely everything. And he made a crap load of money off me. But he also knew that I was always going to pay. I was a good customer. I kind of wouldn't take him for granted. I wasn't an asshole. So we had a really good relationship. And, so there are plenty of good guys out there. But then unfortunately, just like in every industry, you have people who, I guess, see an opening and go, hey, will this guy know if I give him back a 5 instead of a 10? Or, he can't see what the machine says is the charge. So what if I pull a shifty? So that is always something you have to think of. And I mean, for myself, I kind of know now, in a lot of cases, they're the taxi routes I've taken before. So I know a rough estimate of how much they should be. So that's the first thing, is knowing, pretty close to the mark of, okay, it's a trip between here and there should cost this. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I always try and get a receipt of some kind, and I have an app that can read the receipt to me, or I just get a friend to quickly look at the receipt just to make sure it's above board. The third thing I do is on my phone or my Apple Watch, I have it set up that I get a notification of my transactions. So that will say, at this point, at this time, you got charged such and such, and then I'll be able to tell pretty quickly, okay, yep, that's what was happening. But I have had a few cases where, drivers want money beforehand or something like that. Like I often get it where I'm going to pay with my card and I have the card in my hand, and the driver, instead of bringing the machine to me, just takes the card out of my hand, which I don't particularly like or appreciate. Especially as well, a couple of years ago, there was some talk about skimming issues where drivers or people at ATM machines were running the card through something else that was reading the details. And a friend of mine actually gave me a really good piece of advice. And he said, look, don't hold the card in your hand closest to the driver. Hold it in the other hand, because they're not going to reach over your entire body to snatch it out of your hand. So something as simple as that was a great little technique for me to be able to, I guess, stay in control of the situation and not just be at the whim of somebody who wants to snatch. It is kind of funny, however, sometimes that, I'm taking a journey with a taxi driver that doesn't know me, and I'm telling him, yeah, mate, left up here, right here. And he's kind of thinking, hang on, I thought this guy was blind. And it's because I can just tell the roads. I've lived in this area for 20 years. I lived in this area for a couple of years before I lost my sight. So I know most of the roads like the back of my hand. I know what the names are. I can just kind of tell by the feel of the way the car's moving, where we are and where we should be going. And okay, we should have hit a speed bump by now or something like that. So it's kind of funny to see that, because a lot of guys kind of go, well, what the hell's happening? And thankfully as well, it works when I've had a few drinks on me, which means I don't get, messed with on the way home in case somebody decides to take a longer drive and take advantage of the situation. But thankfully that hasn't really happened for a long time. And I think a big part of it for me is kind of just making it clear to the taxi driver that I know the deal. I might be blind, but I'm not dumb to what goes on. So I just try to keep up the chat, build a bit of a rapport and stuff like that. But also kind of make it clear that, I'm no mug. So but look, thankfully it's usually an all right thing. So yeah. So look, that was this week. Next week I'm going to be talking about planes and flying, because I have a few weeks worth of content now, which is more sort of holidays, flying, plane based. So I want to get into that because that's really fun and there's quite a lot to unpack there. So thanks again for listening to the show. As usual, you can get in touch with the show by emailing blindseyepodcast@gmail.com. That's BLINDSEYE podcast@gmail.com. You can tweet me at blindseyepod on Twitter, and you can follow the Facebook page by looking for Blinds Eye Podcast on Facebook. Cheers.